Bismillahir-Rahmanir-Rahim.
In the name of Allah, most gracious, most merciful. My dear brothers and sisters, first I want to point out that every story we share is a real story. And we chose this one to show to all of you why music is haram and that if Allah forbids something it is only to protect us from harm, and we hope that this story will help anyone who struggles with music inshallah. Bismillah. We were a random couple living a normal life. Every day I go to work while my wife stays home and do her daily chores. We were a very happy couple, alhamdulillah. My wife was everything to me, but suddenly I noticed that she started to listen to music a lot. It didn't stop at that, she started right after listening to music in the bathroom while she did her makeup or her skincare routine, and one night after dinner I went to her and stood near the bathroom door and said, "You need to stop doing that, you know that it's not good. Shayateen inhabit bathrooms." And she laughed and replied, "Stop being so backward. What's wrong with it?" The days passed and I noticed my wife spending more time in the bathroom listening to music all the time like a drug and dancing like she's not herself, and one day I came from work at night and I noticed that the house was a mess. Dinner wasn't made and nothing was done the whole day. That's not from the habit of my wife, she's way more organized than me. I heard loud music coming from the bathroom like she used a speaker and not her phone, and I found her dancing a weird dance and I touched her shoulder and called her name. She kept dancing until I shook her and she turned, stopped, and slowly she looked at me in a way I'll never forget. Her eyes were empty like it wasn't her at all. I tried to remain normal while I was scared to death and said, "Stop this music, you're putting it all the time, I'll turn it off right now." And I replaced it with the Quran and she suddenly screamed hard and fell to the floor. I carried her to bed and remained by her side until morning. I couldn't sleep and from that night started the nightmare. I woke up at Fajr and found my wife wide awake staring at me with the same empty eyes as last night. She stood and left our bedroom, so I followed her and she went directly to the bathroom and laughed with a scary laugh. Then she talked to the mirror in a weird language. I was shaking from fear, so I left the bathroom and still heard her non-stop laugh. The moment I put the Quran loud, she screamed and fell on the bathroom floor. I carried her again to bed and closed the door slowly while she was asleep. I called my work and took a day off, and I decided to call the recce that we know, which is one of the best recce ever, and he came after an hour. My wife was still asleep and I explained to the recce everything that happened, and he sat next to my wife and he said, "We will start the ruqya session, but you must remain strong." The moment the recce started the ruqya, my wife opened her eyes and started to scream with a voice that wasn't her own at all. She said, "Stop it." And the recce continued to recite and I was petrified to see my wife in that state. Then the recce took a bottle of water and recited the Quran in it, and he asked me to help him to hold my wife so we would force her to drink that water, and the moment she drank the water she screamed from the pain like she was burning inside. I couldn't bear to see her suffer anymore, so I said, "I think it's enough for today." Recce replied, "My son must be strong or her state will get worse. Please let me do my job." She was screaming again and again and I couldn't bear it anymore, so I said to the recce to stop and accompanied him to the door while my wife fell on the couch and slept again. The recce said before leaving, "It will get worse," and I replied, "Thank you for coming, may Allah be with you. We're good." In the afternoon my wife woke up and came to me while I was cooking for us. She looked at me with her normal eyes and seemed confused. She said, "What happened? Did I sleep all day? How come it's afternoon?" I replied, "Don't you remember what happened? You woke up this morning and went to the bathroom and talked in a weird language to the mirror." She looked at me as if I lost my mind and said, "You got to be kidding. I woke up just now. I don't remember any of what you said." I didn't say anything and kept preparing dinner. Then we ate and I was stunned to see my wife going back to be herself again, but sadly it didn't last long. The same night I woke up to find the bed empty and I heard my wife talking again in that weird language, so I went right away to the bathroom and found her there talking to the mirror. She suddenly turned to me and I froze to see the same empty eyes, and she talked in a voice that wasn't her own and said, "You will never find sleep ever again." And I ran to the living room and put the Quran and she fell in the bathroom. I did not sleep all night. In the morning I called my friend and asked him if he knew a good recce, and he said, "We'll come after with a recce I know," and I waited. An hour later I heard a knock and my friend came with a man that was dressed in a weird way. I don't know why, but I was sure he wasn't a recce, he looked more like a magician. He said, "I can help your wife, I am used to that," and he went toward my wife and started to recite the Quran mixed with something else. And my wife suddenly woke and smiled with a smile that wasn't hers at all. He asked, "Who am I talking to now? Who are you?" And my wife replied with a male scary voice, "I will not leave her." And she suddenly got the strength of 20 men at once, and she managed to knock my friend out and the weird recce as well. I watched in horror at my friend and the weird recce laying in the living room. I was left alone with her, so I ran toward the bedroom and put the Quran out loud and prayed to Allah to help us. Minutes later the house was silent, so I went slowly to the living room and found my wife asleep. My friend and the recce woke somehow and they escaped. And my wife got worse and worse that afternoon. I was left with no choice but to lock her in the bedroom. She kept screaming and laughing at the same time. It was all my fault. If I had let the true recce do his job from the beginning, my wife would be good now, so I took my phone and called him. The recce came again, even after the rude way I treated him last time when he tried to help my wife. This time he looked at the state of my wife and looked at me with pity and said, "Didn't I tell you it would get worse? If you had let me finish last time, the jinn would be out of her by now." And I told him that this time I'm ready. The recce started the ruqyah, and this time, despite that I couldn't bear to see my wife suffering, I held myself and helped him, and the recce finally talked and said to my wife, "What is your name?" And my wife laughed again at that scary laugh, and the recce said, "Why did you possess her?" And the jinn finally talked and said, "She attracted me with music, and when I saw her I fell in love with her. She is beautiful and I will never leave her." I was looking at the recce with horror, and he reassured me, and with many hours of ruqyah and many sessions the jinn finally left my wife. She got better with the days, alhamdulillah, and she replaced music with Quran. Things got back to normal until one day. It was nighttime. I opened my eyes and found my wife looking at me with concern. She said, "I woke up and you weren't in bed. What are you doing in the bathroom at 3 a.m.? I was confused. I replied, "What are you talking about? I was in bed." I looked around and indeed I was on the bathroom floor. My wife smiled and said, "Ah, you are making fun of me, huh?" And I heard in my head again that scary voice, and it said, "Didn't I tell you you will never find sleep again?" And it laughed. I did ruqyah as well, and alhamdulillah, it got better too, and I knew we had to move out from that apartment. We are still doing ruqyah sessions with my wife, and we hope that we will never have to live such an experience again. If I have to give you all one piece of advice, it's that if Allah forbid us something, it's not for nothing, it's for our own good. Look how music almost destroyed my life and the life of my wife. I almost lost her, and a jinn possessed her and possessed me and possessed our house. Be careful. May Allah protect us. Ameen.